so for me, tarot, I think the story that some of you may have heard before is my mum bought me my first tarot deck when I was 12. So I've got this love affair with the tarot ever since, and it started when I was watching Hammer horror movies. Really honest about that. And Vincent Price and Peter Cushing, there was a wonderful portmanteau movie, it's called now, like Doctor's Terrace Tales of Horror or something. And he was reading tarot cards for people in a train. And as he read the tarot cards, their life stories came out. And of course, it turned out they're all dead on their dirty tale. Great film.
Yeah, brilliant.
But I was thinking when I first saw that, and I must have been 10, 11, something like that, I was thinking that these cards are interesting. They can't have just appeared for the film. And so I started to ask about what the tarot cards are. And my mum, who was quite an interesting lady, she was very open to lots of things. She wouldn't have called herself anything other than, she said that she was Christian, but said you didn't need to go to church, you just need to stand under the stars and hug a tree. That was a kind of like thing. And she was very intuitive. And she went out and bought me tarot cards. So my 12th, around my year when I was 12, I got a deck of tarot cards, and the advice was, if you're going to use them, learn about them, which is my mum's advice is everything, really. You're going to do it, learn it, but be safe. And it just so happened that our local library, I sauntered into our local library in Hereford, that's where I live, and great local library, all kinds of stuff in there. And at the back of the library, there was a book on the tarot. It was Arthur Waite's book on the key to the tarot. And right next to it was Aleister Crowley's Magic in Theory and Practice. So I took them both out with the strange looks of the librarian giving me these books. And I devoured them. I really devoured them. So I was sort of introduced to magic and tarot at the age of 12, 13, and moved it on. And ever since then, I've constantly come back to the tarot because I think it's more than what it appears to be. And I'll explain that. Yeah. The other thing about the tarot really for me is I used to do lots of readings with tarot. I used to, if you like, I used to go to these, at the time they were before the New Age stalls, before the New Age festivals. I'm going back a bit, and I used to do craft fairs and readings at craft fairs. And I kind of enjoyed it, but I didn't like the baggage that came with it. And the baggage that came with it was the label of psychic or medium or spiritual. I didn't like that label. And I very rarely now do readings. I do from time to time, don't I?
And you're very, very good.
Well, yeah. And,
you are very good.
But I use them myself. And I think that's where we need to start with the tarot, because I think the tarot is about self-discovery, and it's a magical tool. It's not about doing the readings. Does that make sense? And
yeah, definitely.
Kind of nodded there, yeah. So I suppose I've done a couple of tarot workshops, and I've run a couple of tarot courses, and then about 3 years ago now, my magnum opus I released, you can buy it online, or I'll send you the link. It was a 350 odd page tome about the history of the tarot with the decks in it. So what I'm going to talk about now is based on that. And I was going to show you one and boast about it, because I'm really proud of the book, because it's got all kinds of stuff in it. And there's a workbook that goes with it, except we sold them all. And I haven't got a copy for myself even. So if you're interested, I'll tell you where to get that. Yeah.
Just say, Hartley there, you could ring up and say, hello, yes, my name's Alan Jones. You've got a copy. Oh!
Fly Fishing by JP Hartley. That dates you, Tony. That really dates you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and show you some slides and do a talk, and then we'll come back to this screen where we can just exchange them. I've got some cards to show you, but I think if I structure talk to start with, and we'll go from there. Is that okay?
Before we go any further, Alan, is your book called The Fool's Journey?
Yes.
I'm just looking at it now. Currently unavailable. Okay.
Is that the small one or the big one?
I don't think size matters.
Oh, it does. It does.
I'm just looking at it. I've just lost it. No, I had it just now. I was like, the computer decided to delete it, but I will have a look, mate. I'm going to order that now if it's available.
Before you order it, it's about 25 quid. All right, so be careful. The Fool's Journey comes in two forms. It's a kind of the initial book was only about 200 pages. And I wrote that a number of years ago. And then, you know what you do when you write something, you think it's in stone. And it isn't. You learn more, right? So I decided if I want to write a book, I want to take the history of the tarot as far back as possible, find as many references as I can. There's some very old poetry in there about Tarocchi and stuff. And, you know, there's loads of images. But anyway, and the Kabbalah's in it and all kinds of stuff. But I'll try and do an overview now. And then I'm not trying to sell you a book, by the way. If you really want it, I'll tell you when.
I'm just buying it now.
Ooh.
Hang on.
Look at that. One sale. Open someone. Right.
Here we go. Done. Hang on. Buy now. 23 quid.
Yeah. 300 pages.
I have no idea, mate. It seems to. It's a nice book. All done.
Wow. Thank you. What? Okay, let's go into this. So I'm going to share slides and we go. Okay, so where are we? This should work. There we go. That's what I really wanted to talk about today. It's kind of thoughts on the tarot, and I want to cover something about the origins and the mystery as well as the history. Then I want to look at what tarot decks are and their structure, and then basically look at readings and getting started for those of you who are nervous about it, and for those of you who do readings, raise some particular questions about how you might like to explore readings differently. And then we'll all come back together and you can share your stuff because I'll be really interested. So here we go. When I first started the tarot, I was given this deck of cards. It was the Rider-Waite deck, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I held the rather quaint notion, because I'd read a book that said all the tarot cards predated playing cards, and playing cards came from tarot cards, and tarot cards summed up the great knowledge from ancient Egypt and all that kind of. And I realized very soon that that's the fairy story that we like to invest in the tarot cards. Playing cards are much, 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 much older than tarot cards. The first playing cards actually come from China, were made on paper, and they date back to, I don't know, 2,000 years before Christ, or before Common Era. And tarot cards, playing cards moved in to the Europeans and the West gradually over time, as we know it now, as a game. They've changed quite a bit over time, but the first playing cards date much before tarot cards. We find a poem about Trifoni cards written by this guy called Count Matteo Maria Ballardo, and he wrote this poem in the 1400s, about 1490. And the poem is about a game called Triophy, or Triophy, in which he describes in the poem the cards that they're using to play this game. And the cards are described in 5 chapters, and the first 4 with 14 parts, and the 5th with 22 parts. And that strangely echoes the structure of the modern day tarot cards. Yeah? And what these cards were for, they were for playing a game that we know called Tarocchi. And Tarocchi was about trumps. The word Tarocchi simply means trumps in Italian, which is why we call the major cards the major trumps. And what was happening was, it was a game a bit like whist, where you play with normal playing cards, the 1 to 52 cards and the 4 suits, but you'd have these trump cards, and the trump cards were based on the stations of life, that is, you know, the pontiff, the rulers, the kings, the queens, and the Greek virtues, which is why you start to get the ideas of some of the cards looking like they are coming from the ideas of ancient Greece, for example. And these cards were designed for the game, and the major cards were the trumps that would win the suits, and the trumps were ordered. What is interesting about that, of course, is very early tarot cards or tarocchi cards were painted, and they were often works of art, and they were the patrons that paid the artists actually paid them to put their families' faces on the cards that they were being produced. And so you've got some wonderful Italian playing cards from around about sort of the sort of 1700s, where they're kind of like tarot cards, but the king queens will be the head of the family and his wife, and then the pontiff card, the royal card or the religious card will actually be their local vicar. And these cards are beautiful, and that the earliest tarot deck that we can find really that resembles what we now reckon is an Italian deck. So what I'm trying to get to here is that tarot cards really didn't fall until around about the 1400s, 1500s in Renaissance times in Italy. Now there's some interesting people we need to cover here. One of them is this lovely lady called Lenormand, and she was very popular during the Napoleonic times as being the world's, well, the Europe's foremost cartomancer. She would read playing cards, she would actually read and give fortunes, and she would read for the rich and the famous. In fact, you know, she was probably the equivalent of Jonathan Edwards or Wendy Williams as the modern day psychics, but she was very well respected. And the Lenormand cards were like the ones we see here. They had a playing card background, but with images underneath them. Now, I've got some more Lenormand cards I'll show you in a sec. These are still in existence, or copies of these. They were designed by this woman here, and they were used solely as oracle cards. She would tell fortunes and guide your fate using these cards, which, as I say, had the playing card on. Reading playing cards for fortune telling has a very long history, but in the time we're talking about, there is this wonderful guy called Jean-Baptiste Alliette, who was a barber, and his part-time job was reading fortunes with playing cards. And he decided that he'd make more money reading fortunes with playing cards, and so he reversed his name from Alliette to Atelier. And as Atelier, he wrote a book on how to entertain yourselves with a deck of cards called Tarot in 1785. If you can find a copy, it's worth looking at. I've seen facsimiles of that copy of that book, and it's really interesting. It's written in French, obviously, so. But he also designed a deck of tarot cards called the Atelier Tarot, which I will show you in a moment, and it's exciting. Now, this guy, Jean-Baptiste Alliette, based his idea of what tarot cards were on the writings of this guy called Court de Gebelin, who, about the same sort of time period as Atelier, and he wrote in 1781 a book called The History of the Primitive World. In French, it's L'Esprit des Worlds Primitifs or something. And in this book, de Gebelin took upon himself to write a textbook of the ancient history of all people since the beginning of time. It's a remarkable book. Most of it is made up. And it's true. What he didn't know, he made up. And in this book, because cards were popular at the time of his writing, he decided that cards came from Egypt, and they were carried by gypsies, and they came into the West via the trade routes from Egypt, which is where the idea of the link with tarot cards to Egypt comes from. Unfortunately, de Gebelin was writing at a time before anybody had done any serious work on ancient Egypt. And so within a few years of his publishing his book and him dying, a lot of his historical ideas were just questioned and thrown out. But it's upon his work that Atelier based his tarot work. So in 1785, he published How to Entertain Yourself with a Deck of Cards called Tarot. His previous bestseller was How to Entertain Yourself with a Pack of Cards. So all he did was took what he knew about cartomancy and turned it into the tarot format. Very interesting people, and very, as far as tarot is concerned, as far as modern conceptions of tarot are concerned, very important. Interesting enough, de Gebelin hinted at the idea of the 22 trumps linking to the Jewish alphabet, but it's mentioned very briefly. He's more interested in Egyptian times. So another interesting person is this guy here, Alphonse Louis Constant, who is better known by most occultists and magicians as Eliphas Levi. Eliphas Levi, he took that name because he was studying the Kabbalah, and he actually thought if he had a Jewish sounding name, he'd become a more authentic Kabbalah magician. So he changed it to Eliphas Levi. It's under that name that he wrote dozens and dozens of works on high magic and ceremonial magic. Much of his work is still revered today amongst a lot of occultists. All he was doing really was writing down what he knew from his own studies, and in some ways borrowing sort of material from other sources like Cornelius Agrippa and people before that. He was what's known as a Neoplatonist, so he was very influenced by Paracelsus and the idea of the four humours, which became the four elements, and the four elements became the magical rituals that we know about today. In his book, The Dogma and Ritual of High Magic, he decided and pinned down the idea that the 22 trumps, the major cards, were actually linked to the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And that's where the real link to what we now know as Tarot and the Kabbalah comes from. It comes from this guy here. There's very little evidence that prior to that, people were thinking of merging these two systems. And so 1861, all of Levi's work, by the way, influenced magical orders that followed. He heavily influenced the Golden Dawn and the practice of the Golden Dawn, which is why the Golden Dawn as a magical society, which, by the way, was started by women, but that's another story completely. The Golden Dawn initiation ritual follows the 22 paths of the tree of life, the Kabbalah, and the 22 tarot cards as symbols on that journey. So I've nearly done with this little bit here. Along comes this guy called A.E. Waite, who Crowley was really kind of dismissive about. He thought Waite was the most boring man he'd ever met. But then again, Crowley himself was a bit eccentric. So I know. But Arthur Edward Waite took the work of Levi and decided he wanted to design a tarot deck. And the Rider-Waite tarot deck bears his name. The card that you see there is the Magician card from the Rider-Waite deck. And it's the one that a lot of people will recognize. So a lot of people have this deck. In fact, I would say it's the deck that most people start with. The thing about this was it shouldn't be called the Rider-Waite deck. It should be called the Smith-Waite deck, because the lady that did all the artwork was a lady called Pamela Coleman Smith, otherwise known as Pixie. And she was an artist. She was described as a fairy gypsy. And she was involved on the edge of the Golden Dawn and with some very powerful feminists of the time who were working in the occult and in magic. She was asked to design the cards by Arthur Waite, and she based a lot of her cards on the kind of artwork she was doing. So if you look at the Rider-Waite deck, there is a wonderful series of pictures where the images are actually of her friends. And some of the views in the cards are actually views from the windows that she was looking at. And the cat that appears in the Queen of Swords, I think it is actually her pussy cat, right? Mm-hmm. So she made the thing warm and lovely and homely. And Arthur Waite wrote boringly about it, unfortunately. Pamela Coleman Smith was paid about £72 to produce the artwork for the 78 cards and was never paid any royalties from that. The publishing company Rider published the cards, and that's why we know it today as the Rider-Waite deck. And I think we should call it the Smith-Waite deck, because the beauty of the cards are amazing. Yeah, we should. And
she's amazing.
She's an amazing woman.
Amazing.
She's actually, you may know this. She's actually, she was an occultist and a traveler and a bit of a kind of bohemian artist who experimented and went all over the place. She was written about by loads of people. The poets of the time, the poets written the Golden Dawn, actually wrote about her, were amazed by her and talked about her. This elfish-like gypsy woman opens the door with beaming smiles and brown skin. Anyway, she when she retired, not on the sales of the cards, by the way, just she wasn't very wealthy, and she bought a boarding home in Bude. And
she lived on the Lizard for a while as well.
Yeah, that's cool. Have you seen her grave in Bude?
Well, I heard, Alan, that it's unmarked.
It is, because I've never found it.
No.
No.
I'd love to go and have a look, but
Well,
if you've got more information on that, I'd really like to go and pay homage to her grave in Bude, but I heard it was unmarked.
yeah, it is. It's that she was an amazing woman, and the story I heard, and I really hope is true, is the retirement home that she started to run was a retirement home for Catholic priests. So you've got this woman who was at the core of the occult movement in the 1800s, suddenly looking after Catholic priests in their retirement. So that's the Wide Awake deck. We'll come back to that in a sec. And then the next couple, you're going to know who they are. The two next people is this guy here, Aleister Crowley. You either love or you hate Aleister Crowley. I think it's pretty amazing. But again, the Thoth deck, which he wrote, trying to bring back the Egyptian influences, wouldn't be the deck it was without Frida Harris. Frida Harris was the lady that painted the artwork for it. And Frida Harris, her artwork is beautiful, but it's of a style of art, a geometric style of art, which not many people liked. Again, she was an avant-garde artist. She was the wife of an MP, and she admired Crowley's intellect, and she at some point was his muse. But in my book, I've got letters, I've got copies of letters that she wrote to Crowley and Crowley wrote to her. And if it wasn't for her work, he wouldn't have developed the deck that he did, because he goes on to his meditation and he describes what the fool should look like, and she translates into art, and they have this backwards and forwards correspondence about how she feels the fool should be and how he feels the fool should be. And in later years, he claimed that he taught her everything she needed to know about the occult to paint the pictures. That's not true. She was a woman and a power in her own right, and she brought some wonderful images. There's some great letters from Frida Harris to Crowley that say things like, stop being a git, basically, and no, I'm not lending you any more money. Because he was towards the end of his life, he was a bit of a, he was what he was, and he actually needed as much support as he could get.
We were trying to find out where some of the original artwork was, wasn't we?
Ah.
Sorry, was you
No,
No.
You tell the story.
No.
Well, the sad thing about the Thoth deck, neither Frida Harris or Crowley saw it published as a deck of cards. All the cards that Frida Harris painted existed as big paintings. Now, I was told years ago, and this is the thing, that most of the artwork was destroyed in the Blitz. And it isn't. A vast chunk of it still exists within the National Archives in London. And about 5 years ago, we discovered too late, didn't we? 5 years ago, they had an exhibition of Lady Frida Harris's work with some of the restored paintings. And I found out about it a year after it had finished. So this stuff we know exists, and we'll wait for the next time it comes around again, because this works and will work exists. So to see these paintings in their original format would be amazing, So that's the kind of beginning of the tarot. And I'm going to turn the screen off now and come back to you guys, because I've got one more slide after this. That's the overview. So the thing I want to say about the tarot is there's a lot of mystery about it. There's a lot of unwarranted myth surrounding the tarot. Its history is more interesting than the myth that people create around it. And some of the people that were involved in making the key tarot decks were just amazing. And they were women. These were women artists, and they were women magicians and occultists that were working at a time that was very misogynistic, right? Anyway, so for those of you that are new to the tarot, can I just simply say that the tarot cards, what makes a tarot deck is the structure. There are 22 cards called the major trumps, and I'll talk more about those in a moment. And then there are 56 cards that form the minor mysteries or the minor arcana. And those are simply like a pack of playing cards. They're 1 through 10, and then there's 4 cards of royalty. Usually it's the page, queen, king, and knight. And we'll talk why that's seen as important. The modern playing deck, of course, has lost one of the court cards. So you just have Jack, Queen, and King, or Page, Queen, and King. You've lost the knight. And what may have been the Fool has been translated into the Joker of the Pack. I'm not too sure about the history of that bit. Outside of that, there are thousands of other kinds of decks that aren't strictly tarot. They may be tarot inspired, or they may be constructed as oracle decks, but not strictly tarot. There are a load of tarot decks that were designed that only have ever had the 22 major arcana painted for them or designed for them. And they're kind of like half tarot decks, if you like. The artwork that must go into making 78 individual cards is incredible, right? Of the current cards that are on the market, there are about 2,500 published tarot decks.
Cat's got most of them.
Yes.
Got a few. I've got that. I've got a Thoth deck that a follower of Crowley gave me. I can't read.
Yeah. Well, we can get onto this because Crowley is really interesting. So, of that 2,500 decks, I would suggest that most of them either follow the Rider-Waite pattern or the Crowley pattern. And the only major difference there is that Crowley changes the numbering of some of the major cards for reasons that are really interesting, which we won't go into now. And Rider-Waite sequence follows another sequence. Again, I'm not plugging the book. If you get the book, I've actually got a table that shows the various tarot cards and the ordering of the major arcana. And what's interesting there is how there's kind of been an agreement that most of the cards should follow one of the two patterns. The other cards that exist, of course, are tarot cards that follow either Pamela Coleman Smith or Frida Harris's structure, but are based upon a specific theme. So you can have the Lord of the Rings tarot, you can have the Disney tarot, you can actually have the Robin Hood tarot. And what they're following a particular mythic story, and the cards fit in. I used to use a lot the Arthurian tarot because I'm really into King Arthur, and they work really well if you know your Arthurian myth. If you don't know your Arthurian myth, they're slightly awkward. R.J. Stewart's Merlin tarot, I love that, but that's completely bonkers with its major arcana because it doesn't follow the pattern that we're used to. But with tarot cards or oracle cards, you basically pay your money, you take your choice, and you've got to go what speaks to you. So when we talk tonight, I'm going to talk mostly about the Pamela Coleman Smith deck, but I'll show you a few of the others. These, I'll try and show these. I was going to use another camera, but maybe I can just hold on. These are quite an oldish set. They're a bit sticky. They're a reproduction of the Le Monde tarot cards or oracle cards. Just hold on, I don't know if you can see that. There we go. Now, this is not the deck that she would have used. She had the one with playing cards on. But you can buy these, and basically, it mixes the names of the cards with, let's call it sort of bibliomancy. There is a poem that you take the poem to reflect your situation. So if I find one here, it says, okay, this one here, just pull this at random. Okay, that card there, number 24. And the poem says, the heart is a symbol of, oh God, my glasses. I won't read that one. That's why I don't use these, by the way. Where's one I did read earlier? If I read it earlier, I'll find it again. But you can buy these, and a lot of people swear by them. I know I've got some friends that are professional readers, and they use these. They just think they're the best things since sliced bread. Here we go. This card, I can read this one. This is what I pulled out earlier to read. It's a card called Le Fox or Reynard, and it says on here, the fox is sly, a friend is too. Someone may try to deceive you with wily glances. The Reynard snaps. Avoid new chances. Beware old traps. So you take that poem and you use that poem to inspire you to move forward. They're lovely. If you get a look at a set of these, you may like them. I kind of like the idea of the poem because I know that a friend of mine who uses them will actually say, pick a card and get the person to read that to them. And that then becomes the kind of reading. So there's this. Now, the Atelier deck, I do have a copy of the Atelier deck. I'd like to say if this was original, it wouldn't be in a box like this, it would be in a shelf. But this is a reproduction of the Atelier deck. That's the Barber. Yeah, and these are lovely. I mean, again, they're in French. This one, I'll try and show you. Obviously, a Garden of Eden thing going on there. There's this one, which you'll all recognise as the Fool. Okay, it's beautiful. I love this one. This is the Magician. So there are many of the cards that the Major Trumps that you would recognise. The Wheel. Yeah. Okay. But there are other cards you wouldn't recognise, like these, which are about the cosmos, are about the planets, are about the stars, which shows that these cards are themselves capturing symbolism from other traditions. I've never used these to read, but I use them to teach with, and I think they're really quite nice cards. I want to remind me to talk about the Fool in a minute. Okay, so that's that. And the last deck of cards I'll show you before I get into the main bit. As I say, a bit like Cat, I suppose, we could actually spend the whole evening just showing each other our cards. We'll have to meet up and... Now, this is quite an old deck. And I got this off eBay. It's called the Nile Fortune cards. I've seen copies of this deck with Masonic symbolism on there. The Masons used to use them. Secret Society used to use them. And what they are playing cards, so you can play a game with them. But round the outside of the playing card are words or statements, which become the fortune statements. And the idea would be you take the card, you'd read the number, and then you'd say, an early marriage and an early bereavement, if you really want that card. You know? So this is a deck of cards that's made up, and every single one has the information written around the sides. I've seen I've got a modern version of this, but it's pointless me showing you because it won't work on the screen. But a very modern version of this with the writing and talking about the cards. Nice deck, again, depending on what you think the reading is for. Okay. So the deck that most people will start with this is the Rider-Waite deck. I've got a smaller version of the cards here, and we'll talk more about that in a sec. Okay. The Fool. The Fool is an interesting card. On a lot of early decks, Italian decks, the character Lamat or Fool or whatever is depicted as a harlequin. Yeah. In Italian theatre called Commedia dell'arte, the harlequin character in the comedies was the only character in the play that the audience could see, but the other players couldn't. Okay, so in a branch of Italian theatre called Commedia dell'arte, it's where we get Punchinella from and all those kind of wonderful things. The Fool character was the character that managed the interplay between the audience and the other characters on stage. Sometimes the Fool would actually drive the plot because he played tricks on the audience members. What we now know as slapstick comedy comes from Commedia dell'arte because they used to use a big slapstick which made a noise to sort of end violence. The Punch and Judy show is a kind of really overly simplified and crass version of Commedia dell'arte. What is really interesting is the Fool would be the person, or the harlequin would be the person who can't see, who would keep putting the chairs away so people fall over. He would be the role of fate coming in to the story to drive the narrative plot, which is why in the tarot deck, we often see the Fool as being outside of the cycle of cards. The Fool is the person that takes the journey or is the manipulator or the victim of fate, depending on how you see it. So when we talk about the cards in a moment in this sequence, the Fool is slightly different for me than the other cards, because I think we mentioned this a bit, where all the cards start with 1. So 1 is the Magician, it's also the 4 aces. And really it's the Fool that goes around the journey, which I'll explain in more detail in a sec. So when we read the cards, we are the Fool, right? And we are the Fool that has both the potential to become and has learned everything, only to forget it again and go around the cycle. And The fool is us at our most innocent and open and naive, which is why that such a powerful image. So, of the 22 cards, then there are 21 plus the fool. Right now, I'm gonna are you with me so far? By the way, am I boring you? Am I going on? You know.
No.
Okay. Now, I want to back off a little bit from tarot and just talk generally. I've got a thing about oracles and fortune telling, and I'll share it with you. You don't have to believe me. I don't like the phrase fortune telling, which is one of the reasons I backed away from doing readings. People would come and they'd say, tell my fortune. And what they really wanted to hear was they're going to get rich, get married, or whatever, you know. And that's not what oracles are about, right? Oracles have never been about telling you decidedly what's going to happen. Okay, in stories and in films and in popular culture, that's what a fortune teller does. A fortune teller tells you what your life is going to be, but actually the oracle never was that. Think back to the great oracle at Delphi. The people would travel to see the oracle, to listen to the words of the oracle, and they'd travel across deserts, they'd travel across rivers, they'd risk their life and their limbs and their money to get to the oracle. You bet your bottom dollar they didn't stand at the bottom, say to the oracle, and the oracle said to them, what can we do for you? They wouldn't say, I don't know, just give me a general reading, please. They wouldn't say that because the oracle was revered and was important, and what the oracle said came from divine sources. The great Sibylline monasteries in Greece, where the women would write on leaves and parchments their predictions of the future. They didn't give them to anybody. They left them outside the cave so the winds would blow them and they'd be caught by the person who needed them. And they take this meaningless story and make it their own, right? An oracle is not about telling you your future. The oracle is inspiring you by what they read for you. And that's what I believe about it. So when we go to these New Age festivals and I see loads of tarot readers, and what they're doing is simply playing, I'll guess what you want to know, that's not a tarot reading. A tarot reading actually focuses on the question the person has, or at least the area of life they want some insight for. And so when I run my tarot course and done some tarot training, I feel actually, not insisted, but suggested strongly that they use a question and have the tarot cards answer or give insights to a question. So sorry, I got off one of that. I just get so strong about it because actually any one of us could play the Derren Brown personality guessing game, couldn't we? We could sit there and read people's personalities, and actually that's not what tarot cards are about. Tarot cards are about a discussion between the reader, and I don't like that word either, but about the oracle and the person who has the challenge. And if we think about it in those terms, it liberates us. I'll talk more about ethics about this later on, but that's it. So questions. Once you've got a question, you use the cards to help you answer the question and you gain insight. Now, I firmly believe if you can read the tarot, you can probably use any oracle. And eventually, you can use the tarot without having the tarot cards. So that's the first thing I believe about the tarot. Second thing I believe about the tarot, as most occult magicians will, they see tarot as actually being their magical tools. They don't need a temple. They don't need the dagger, the sword, the chalice, because they're all the tarot cards. So I've sort of worked with somebody, particularly the builders of the Atridium, which is Paul Foster Casey's stuff. They teach about using the cards as the altar in the temple, and placing the cards is about placing the space and getting it ready for magical work, which, forgive me, but I think 99% of the readers at the Mind, Body and Spirit festivals would freak out at that, because as far as they're concerned, the card is giving them channeled information from beyond. One last point about oracles. From a Druid perspective, we know that the Druids were a group of teachers, philosophers, oracles. We know that they did this, and we've got evidence of stuff written by people who visited the bards to get inspiration. And the bards would draw down inspiration from what they called the awen, which was the light from above. They would go into a kind of meditative state, a trance, draw down the awen, and then they'd write a song, speak some poetry, point to some trees, look at the clouds, and they would give a reading that actually was nonsensical on first hearing. They would be possessed by the awen or the imbas, if you're Irish. And so people would take away the story, and they would then find meaning and relevance to their lives. So, with that, I'm going to carry on, unless I get shouted at to stop. I'm going to try and hold these up as we do it. This is my big teaching set of Rider-Waite stuff. If I ever do anything stagey to talk about, they're quite nice. These are the 4 aces. They're the 4 number 1 cards in the deck. And we have the 4 suits of pentacles, cups, swords, and wands. Or ace, or you can actually have clubs. But those, now these, because of where they were designed and how they were talked about, represent the 4 Plato's elements: earth, air, fire, and water. The argument is currently about whether, not currently, but has been about whether swords is air or fire and wands is air or fire. That's the argument. And in fact, we won't go into that now, it's a bigger discussion. I always think that swords are about air. Now, for me, if I think of a sword, I think of air, I think of intellect, I think of mind. That's my starting set of correspondences. I also think of east, I think of yellow, I think of Mercury. I also think of trickster, because that's the first cycle of the magician. The next one, of course, is wands. Where is it gone? Wands, which for me is it's south, it's fire, it's energy, motivation, vitality. It is, whereas air is autumn. This is air is spring. This is summer. It's vitality, and it's about health as well, physicality. The cups are west, and they're water, and they're emotions. And lastly, the pentacles are north, and they're earth. And all the associations you may have or may not have. But what I'm showing you these 4 first is that these 4 qualities are the building blocks of our reality. They're the building blocks of who we are as people, according to Plato's philosophers. We are all earth, air, fire, and water to various degrees. Our moods, our health, our well-being can be related to all of these things, which is why the 4 aces are really important. They signal the growth in these areas. So a card that's the 2 of Pentacles, well, if that's the beginning, the first one, then the 2 of Pentacles is actually the next, add another pentacle. It's about the balance and the growth in this area of life. Come back to that in a second. If you've never done tarot before, and Rebecca, I'm hoping you're still with us a little bit. You don't have to learn 78 cards. You only need to learn 10. Well, thereabouts. And I think that tarot is about a story, and it's the story of the fool's journey. And once you understand the story, you understand how it can be used for yourself and for readings. I'm very quickly going to go through the story with the 22 cards. And if you don't want to buy the book, I'll actually send you a copy of just the story. All right, I'll do that in the notes anyway. In the beginning, all that existed was the potential for being. It didn't know where it was going. In the beginning was everything and nothing. The nothing thought, I'm going to make something. And the magician started to manifest the life around them. But manifestation is just the start of a long journey. Once you get something from nothing, you have to do something with the something that you created. Otherwise, it's pointless. So the magician looked around and go, what can I create? I need to balance my creative energy with the spiritual woman who has got who's the guardian to the mysteries. And she sits between the 2 pillars of Boaz and Jacqueline, the entrance to the temple. She is guiding her mysteries. And without her, I cannot make life. So the magician flows into, in all senses of the word, the high priestess, who either says, sod off, or come on in, depending on what she's thinking. And if she says, come on in, well, we then get to a closer form of physical manifestation. The Empress gives birth to the idea. Bear in mind that these two cards here, these feminine and masculine energies here, don't exist other than energies. It's here they come into existence. She nurtures the idea and eventually gives birth to the idea. But when she gives birth to the idea, it needs to be supported and controlled and managed. And actually, this card, the Emperor, is about building and planning and supporting. Too much building, planning and supporting becomes obsessive and becomes limiting. So this card needs to know when to let go, because it's now got the little child and has guarded the little child to a point at which the child can escape, and in their escape find material enlightenment in the form of the Hierophant, which is about knowledge. It's about seeking of spiritual knowledge after the material phase has gone through. Because once you get spiritual knowledge, you find that you have to commit to a path, the lovers. You're not committing to another person necessarily, you're committing to the idea of growth and development. And once you've made that commitment underneath the spiritual awakening that you've just had, then you have to make movement, you have to move forward. Because actually, if you don't commit and move forward, you stay stuck. So you have to move forward. Interestingly, the Chariot and almost every deck of cards, apart from some of the theme ones, can't move. Look at that Chariot, ain't going to move. It's not about movement, physical movement, or you could say you're going to travel to distant lands, but it's about the movement of the soul, of the spirit, of the ideas. And that movement causes you to require strength to take the next step. Now, Crowley's deck doesn't have strength here, it has readjustment, because you have to rebalance. Both story makes sense, but he needs strength to take the next step. And when you take the next step, you need some time to be on your own to find the new you. Once you find the new you, you realize that you're going around a cycle. If you want to, if you really, really want to, you can go around that cycle again. You can go back to the magician and back. But this is the conscious material cycle. Yeah? What you have to do is give up any thoughts of the material balance and weigh up. This is where Crowley had strength, and this is strength. You have to weigh up the potential of going deeper in yourself, which takes you to an unconscious journey where you sacrifice everything you thought you knew, and you sacrifice yourself so you can gain wisdom. When you gain wisdom, you actually are reborn. You conquer the old ideas. You transform from what you were to what you are. This is not a physical death. This is a death of the old, things that tied you back. And once you've done that, of course, you have to realize that you are now standing between worlds. You're standing between the bridge between the conscious what was, and the unconscious what will be. And the what will be needs to be fed and watered. And when that's fed and watered, you realize that you're a slave or not to the shackles of the material world. The devil, actually the chains that hold these match the chains that are on the lover's card if you look at it. And these chains can be slipped off the neck. People are trapped in their own hell by choice or by inaction. And this card is about actually you need to step beyond the limitations. In a lot of cards, you see the devil as being people stuck in a rut. In the Crowley card, I'm not going to just look at it. If you've got the Crowley deck, it's brilliant. And I'll say that later. Once you realize that you can break your shackles and limitation, then a change is going to come. You have to wipe away the old structures. You wipe away the things that have been holding you back and you find something new. If you don't accept change, by the way, it'll come and bite you in the arse anyway. Yeah. And once you accept change, of course, you realize that actually things can be different. You realize that there is a silver cloud. You realize you can reach for the star. And once you reach for the star, you realize that you've now got to come out of the shadows. Little crayfish coming out into the land here. It's the crayfish crawling from the unconscious to the conscious to take a roadway back to conscious manifestation. And there's a cycle to this. when you've done that, you're actually out into the sun, and you've almost completed the journey. But you've got to go back home. And you go back home triumphant. Now, this is very Christian, which is one of the reasons I don't like this particular day. The idea of Judgment Day, with the idea of the end of the world in terms of Christianity, doesn't work for me. What works for me is that I'm going to let go of all the old stuff, and I'm going to be reborn into a new world. And of course, that is the new world. And the new world, she's stepping just like the fool, isn't she? She actually stepping just like that means that you go back to the beginning, start all over again. Now, if you have that sense of that story exists every moment you live, every day you live, in every aspect of your life, in every field of your existence. A project idea can go through this, a career can go through this, a lifetime can go through this. And one of the things that we forget about sometimes is that we are always changing. And the tarot reminds us that we're part of the cycle. I'm just going to share a picture on the screen, which maybe will make it a little bit more. I know you really won't see this screen very well. You see me very well, but it's in the book. Oops, there we go. Now, this image there's an error in it, really, because it has the fool here. But this is the passage, the cycle of the cards. From the magician right the way around the wheel and down into the unconscious and right the way back again. You may have kind of realized, by the way I've been talking now, there's more than a hint of psychology in this. But that's because I take the tarot cards to a psychological place, as Carl Jung took them with the mythic cycle and man and his symbols, and also with a guy called Joseph Campbell and the story cycle. But that's it, that's our story. And once we realize that that's the story, we can then create really interesting readings based upon that journey. So I'll stop the screen share and come back. The only thing I'll say now, of course, is if you've got the magician and the magician is creation, then the ace of pentacles is beginning of things in a material sense. The ace of wands is the beginning of things in a practical, physical sense. The ace of swords is the beginning of things in an ideas, communication sense. And the ace of cups is the beginning of things in an emotional sense. Once we follow those aces, the twos become the elemental pairs or parts of the high priestess. Yeah, and you have active, passive all the way through the cycles. So if you have got a deck of tarot cards and you haven't done it, lay them out on the floor with the fool at the top, lay the 1 to 10 of the major arcana, and then put the 1 to 10 of the minors underneath, alongside them. And then you'll find that the other 11, or the remaining major cards, by the way, the 10 to 21, will actually fit on the other side, because they're just different harmonics of those original cards. And that, for me, is how you start to learn the cards. You learn the story, you learn the imagery, and the cards, for me, are not necessarily about having any power in and of themselves. The power comes from the ability of the reader to connect and tell stories. And I don't mean that in any disparaging way. All of our lives are a story. If the tarot reader can tell a story to the person they're reading for, the person they're reading for can take meaning from that story. So if somebody says to me, my question is about work-life balance, right? And I pull a card out and the card happens to be, oh, look at that, the devil, right? Then I can give them a story starting at the devil about their life balance, right? If they said to me, it's about, am I going to move house? Where are we going to move in the next year, right? Okay, where are we going to move next year? I can just shuffle the cards, take the card out, and oh, look at that. Actually, that's the end of the cycle. It's about accepting the next level, the next time round. because I know the story, I know the meaning. And of course, if it was the minor cards, I'd simply adjust that open story to either focus on mind, physical energy, emotions, and material things. And the only thing I need to say then is that the cards I haven't really covered in this very brief introduction are the court cards, the Jack, the Queen, the King, sorry, the Page, the Knight, the Queen, and the King. And depending on which decks you use, they'll either be Page, Knight, Queen, and King, or they may actually be Knight, Queen, Page, and King, depending on their order. But basically, they're people. On the whole, they're people. And the way I think of that is I may look at the King of Cups, and for me, it might remind me of a friend of mine. Right? And I start with that point. Yeah. It's more than that, however, because the cards, the 4 cards, court cards, are also mirrors of the east, south, west, and north. They're mirrors of the directions. They're mirrors of the seasons. So they give you deeper understanding. So, summary. Trump cards are the major archetypes, the themes of your life. The minor cards are the minute details, the actions, the interactions of the components of your life. And the court cards are actually the people in it or the seasons and times around it. And that's a very simple, condensed overview of what the cards are about. So when it comes to reading for you, you can do it. When it comes to reading for other people, you tell them a story.